Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Angie Clark. I'm part of the marketing team here at Perficient. And on behalf of our entire team, I'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar. Before we move on to our presentation around change management for Teams and user adoption, I just wanted to go over a few basic housekeeping items. First, please feel free to submit any questions you may have during the presentation today by typing them in the chat window located on the right side of your screen. Please make sure to state your questions clearly, and our speakers will try to address those as time allows towards the end of the presentation. If you still have any unanswered questions after the webinar or would like to request any additional information about our services, please feel free to reach out to our speakers directly. You can also fill out the Contact Us form located on our Perficient.com website. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you within the next few business days. A link to the slides will also be included. Now that we've covered a few of those webinar related items, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. On the call with us is Ron Jones, our Director of Modern Workplace here at Perficient. He is joined by David Chapman, Managing Director and Chief Strategist of our Organizational Change Management practice. And with that, Ron, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Angie. I really appreciate it. And of course, David, thank you for joining us today. Really are thankful to have you with us to really talk about accelerating change management with Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. This would be a great call. We're in unprecedented times, so we'll layer that approach in here as well. Because we're not simply talking about teams, we're talking about teams in a unique environment today. So it could be a great conversation.
Definitely. But first, let's talk about Perficient and who we are. So we're one of the top 1% of Microsoft partners. And within that comes a lot of breadth and depth across all of our organization when it comes to technologies and whatnot. Let's go to the next slide. So we serve the Global 2000 and mainly across the US with about 20 locations, but also a global presence with multiple global delivery centers in China, India, and Mexico. Like I said, we have 20 plus locations in the US and over 3,500 colleagues. I think we're at 3,700 now, as this thing indicates. Founded in 1997 and publicly traded and really just devoted to serving our customers. Our Microsoft practice has moved over 5 million seats to the cloud at this point, really all about Office 365 and Microsoft 365 projects and enablement. And some of the things that differentiate us, of course, are not just our strategic relationship with Microsoft, but our digital agency helping us to deliver employee experiences to the enterprise, our organizational change management practice dedicated to not just Microsoft, but all technologies across all the stacks, which is pretty great. And of course, when it comes to Microsoft Teams specifically, we have dedicated practices for Teams Voice, for security, and of course, collaboration, really rounding out our offerings and bringing the full stack to our customers and really serving as a trusted advisor.
Yeah, so Ron, on the change management front, as you know, we have a standalone change management practice. The practice consists of change management professionals who are dedicated to just that, change management. Our practice isn't tied to a specific business unit. However, we do more with our Microsoft practice than any other. And why that's key is because we're well versed in the Microsoft technology, specifically even Microsoft Teams. What it brings to our clients is expert ability on the technical side, coupled with expert ability on the change management, adoption, and engagement fronts, giving our clients a win-win solution. We're not trying to do change management with people who will give it lip service as an afterthought, but with folks who really understand this discipline really, really well.
That's right. And as an organization that does offer change management as well as general technical enablement, we just want to let everyone know that we're here to help. I think probably over 90% of Americans now are under some type of order to stay at home. And in these uncertain times, as we all say, there's 40,000 team members on our side that are really willing to help and get you remote ready. And that comes with, anything from virtual consultations, workshops. We have offerings for getting you online with teams within 10 days. We also have solutions for crisis management and communications, accelerated adoption, even prepping for Project Cortex, which is a huge knowledge management offering from Microsoft coming up. All these things are really at your disposal as a customer. And just keep in mind that we're here to help during these uncertain times. Now let's talk through our agenda. We'll give a brief overview on change management. Odds are if you're listening to, watching, or attending this, you probably know some of the standard pieces of change management and the overview and whatnot, but we'll still get into that just as a primer. Then we'll get into some of the common change management approaches, challenges, and whatnot, segueing into how things are different now. And then we'll get into some obstacles that are common and really spend a lot of time in accelerating adoption and give you some solid tips for doing so. And then we'll take questions and hopefully provide some answers at the end of this.
Awesome.
You never know what you're going to get, so.
That's right. Well, let's talk about change management for a second. And change management fundamentally, and to make sure foundationally we're in the right place, we're talking about a structured approach for enabling people to be ready, willing, and able to accept and embrace new ways of working. We know that any project that we do has two key factors for success, or criteria for success. And the first is we've got to get the technology right. Without that, we're putting lipstick on a pig, right? I don't care how great my communication or training is, if the technology solution doesn't work, then we're going to have a problem. The good news is that we usually get the technology piece right. You've probably seen the statistic over the years. It's been out at least 12 years as far as I can find it back, and maybe farther than that. The 2/3 of all projects fail, and that number isn't changing. In fact, it may be going up a little bit, and it's not changing because we miss on the technology piece. No, we get that part right. We're missing because we miss on the adoption piece. That part is where our focus is. That's why change management practitioners exist. That's what we care about. And we know that 2/3 of our ROI for any given solution is driven by, or 2/3, 3/4, excuse me, is driven by people behaving the way we want them to behave. So there's always value in putting a new technology solution in. But the real value comes when we get the people to do what we want with that technology or with that process. That's where the value is. And so that's historically the purpose of change management. And historically, and I say historically because we're going to talk about how times have changed a little bit and how it is shifting how we do our work. But that pragmatic approach that I spoke of, that structured way of doing business, is key, right? Change management is not a fly by your seat of your pants discipline. We don't get people there, and I say there, I'm using air quotes here, to where we want them to be, to behave differently, to buy in and promote whatever new way of working might look like, because we communicate on Monday, we train on Tuesday, and we go live on Wednesday. No, it takes time. People have to decide to opt in. They have to decide to work in new ways. Now, kind of giving away the punchline a little bit, the new way of working was decided for many of us in the past few weeks, right? And so we'll talk about that. But we're still going to apply these principles that you see on the screen. And there's a number of change management methodologies and approaches out there. This is Perficient. If you're familiar with ProSci or LaMarche or Cotter, you're going to see a lot of similarities here. But our specific approach has 4 phases: the define, communicate, enable, and sustain phase. The arrows in the center talk about the iterative nature of that. It's a methodology that we continually revisit as project conditions change, as people change, as their dispositions change. We as change management practitioners have to change, or at least change our approach with the project to reflect that. But we always have to start somewhere within a circular iterative methodology, right? There's an entry point. And in this case, for us, it's the define phase. We always start with answering the question why, and we do it in terms that are meaningful to our users. Simply put, WIFM, right? You've heard of that. What's in it for me? Why should I care? Because if I get people to understand that, what's in it for them, why they should care, why their world is better because of whatever change we're enacting, then we're well down the path to change management. Now, we'll talk more about how we apply this to the circumstance we find ourselves in with COVID-19 here in a few minutes. But this is the foundational and fundamental principles that we're going to draw from, and this doesn't change.
That's right. So why do we need such a thoughtful approach, right, David? I mean, it's because you have something called the chasm, and this kind of started from a marketing and why do people adopt technology kind of thing for consumer purposes, but those things also map to the enterprise itself because you have a long list of groups that you're trying to enable when it comes to change management. And the real facts of this is that only 34% will be willing to adopt new technology. So amongst your innovators, your early adopters, your early majority, your late majority, and of course the laggards, can't forget about those guys, you're really going to have a hard time crossing that chasm that you see at the early adopter phase. That can either make or break your project, which is why you want to make sure that you put all of your thinking and a lot of elbow grease, so to speak, within that first little bit of planning. And then you get to the point where you can pivot and right size and really make some of these things work out for you. But if you can't cross this chasm, then you're really going to have a hard time really going up the rest of the hill and the rest of the bell curve as you're seeing it today. So what are we doing this for, right? We're really trying to make sure that we're getting value out of our team's implementation, because if you look across the spectrum here, you have your ROI going vertically, and then your achievability, your time and difficulty to achieve going across the horizontal plane. And what you find is through deployment and activation, you're going to get about that much. You see a little cutout right there? That's the amount of value you're going to get by just turning it on. And compared to where you could go, where that red dot is, that's pretty minuscule. That's pretty minimal. And what you're trying to do is make sure you use some of the classic teachings that Dave will definitely drive in for you of awareness, enablement, and driving proficiency into really rounding out your offering for whatever platform you're choosing. Today, we're talking about Microsoft Teams, because really the seldom achieved piece is how people are really starting to excel. And you'll see reports from other organizations about how they're doing so and how difficult it is to get to that proficiency level, especially right now, because unfortunately, before things changed, there was a really interesting position on remote work, which we'll get to in the next slide. So remote work has always been seen as a risk, right? Because at one point, according to the State of the Industry for Information Security report offered by Shredit last year, 32% of all companies, think that they experienced a data breach, right? And unfortunately, 96% of Americans are looking at data breaches first as employee negligence versus bad actors. And that's pretty powerful when it comes to the trust in an organization, because this affects where you get a loan, who you allow to, have your credit information potentially, who you decide to shop with, who you bank with. Things like that are all determined by your confidence in that 96% and how you're looking at the consumer market. And then to take it even further, 80% of North American C-suites, meaning C-level executives, believe that data breaches are higher when employees work off-site. And that metric alone really limited how we looked at working from home and how we could actually get more benefit out of working from home versus in the office. And then this happened, right? Then we had the good old COVID thing, and now we're in a totally different ball game. Wouldn't you say, David?
Sure, right? We're in the first pandemic in 100 years, and we are having to learn what that means and what that looks like, and it's changing everything. It's unprecedented. And we talked about a few weeks ago how ready we were and prepared on the medical and social fronts, right? There's a lot of talk, if you remember from a couple weeks ago, do we have enough masks? And are they in the right places? How are we getting them there? Same thing with ventilators. And how do we choose who's going to get a ventilator versus who doesn't? And those are life or death decisions. And on the lighter side, we didn't have enough toilet paper. It seems like in the last week or so, maybe that problem is starting to rectify itself a little bit. But at the end of the day, they're big deals, and they're things that hit us pretty hard and very, very quickly. But on the business front, we asked the question, were we ready for this? In how we were set up to work. Think about it, Ron. When we do a lot of projects, or a lot of the projects we do, almost every project we've done historically, in my 25 to 30 years of business, we've had a chance to prepare. We've had the idea to do a project. We did a business case. We decided the spend was justified because the ROI was meaningful. We put a project team together. We planned it. We did our requirements, we did our build, we did our testing. On the change management side, we did our communications and our training and our stakeholder management aspects. And then we hit go live, and then we're ready.
Right. There's normally a systematic approach to things, right? There's a repeatable thing that really makes firms like ours trusted advisors. And yet, with scenarios like this, it's a little bit more unsystematic.
Correct. We were all thrust into that 90% work from home thing almost overnight, right? There was maybe a week where the American worker was instructed, take your laptop home tonight because we're not sure if you're coming back tomorrow, right? But at the end of the day, it was put upon us. There was no planning time. We didn't get to go through that change management methodology I laid out earlier. It was there. And so where do we find ourselves? And there's likely three situations or three scenarios that companies found themselves in. The first scenario, which I think is the smallest group, to be honest with you, is a company that had implemented necessary tools and technologies and processes and had trained and gotten buy-in for how to use of their employees on how to use those tools, how to work collaboratively from wherever they were. Those companies were ready. Those companies, I don't want to say didn't miss a beat, because I think everybody's missing a beat, especially as we enter into a recession. But at the end of the day, those companies were pretty ready, and it was a minimal event for them versus for the rest of us, right? And that's, again, the smallest group. The second group of people had the technology, had purchased Microsoft Teams, but either hadn't rolled it out at all or hadn't rolled it out fully with the adoption required. I think that's pretty common. This group has Teams. This group doesn't use it yet. They still are on older technologies or different technologies. Or the third bucket is the group of companies that really got caught in the lurch, where they hadn't invested in the technology and then obviously clearly didn't have the adoption. So both of those things are going to have to happen for them to be successful. I suspect for the majority of people listening here, you find yourselves in bucket 2 or 3, and that's okay, because that's what we want to address over the balance of the time.
That's right. I mean, it's one thing to just have to operate at scale, right? Because, when you go back to the first option that you had, you don't have to move the slides, but the first option is just a matter of I have the tools and I can move. And, when you look at the reports on the next slide, it really rings true that companies are getting a lot of value out of Microsoft Teams. You read the Forrester TEI report, the Total Economic Impact report, and it says that 80% of leaders are reporting that the accessibility features of Teams are making their organization more productive. And on another side, 83% of leaders reported that Teams helps their organization with customer experiences. And with all these different things, a lot of us are still chasing after those numbers, still chasing after that value, and it's different for each organization. But unfortunately, many companies have implemented Teams successfully, but don't get the benefits promised. And part of this is really trying to prescribe why and how we can kind of overcome some of those things. And I mean, I think now it's even more important, right? Because when you start talking about remote work, there are new challenges, and there are common obstacles that you're going to have when it comes to remote work. Because as David mentioned earlier, we're all thrust into a scenario that we did not get to choose to work from home on Monday. It was a thing because our local principalities and municipalities decided that that's how we need to conduct business in order to be safe. And in order to do so, you're going to suffer from about 9 common obstacles. Tech fragmentation, because all of your tools have been running at a business as usual pace business as usual pace, which means that, you access some via VPN, you access some via the web, and all the different patchworkings of applications that you have pretty much just been, well, that's how it runs. But now there's a special spotlight shown on it now because you're working from home constantly. Loneliness as a pain point, you're really looking at not just employees' health, but their mental health as well during these hard times. Office culture is now disconnected. Those meetings you used to have, whether you're in the hallway or your weekly meetings, or even just going to lunch with a couple coworkers, all those things are out the window. And so we have to find ways to mitigate that, to make sure that people still feel a part of the organization. There's a trust component where your business continuity plans and other things, the more transparent your organization is, the more trust people can have in your organization without the organization having to overcompensate. When it comes to workflow automations, business processes, and all those other pieces, we talked about access to technology being fragmented, but also the way that things connect, and also the way that I can be enabled as an employee. Those things also come to light very quickly and become problematic for folks. You're hoping during this time that your collaboration ecosystem holds tight, or at the very least can be used as an engine for reconnecting employees and whatnot. But if it's not sound, then that can become one of the biggest problems when it comes to replacing in-person meetings and some of the other pieces that really get along with employees being productive on a daily basis. Operating models are the same thing. And of course, the availability of access can be very restricted. It's not just a matter of VPN versus not, but it's really just a matter of when you start looking at working from home, all these things bubble up to the surface and have a new level of importance that are often overlooked.
So transitioning, so with that as a backdrop, right? So we talked a little bit about change management as a foundation, the environment we find ourselves in today, and some of the characteristics that Ryan just laid out of what that looks like. Now what? Let's say you've rolled out Microsoft Teams, which is an awesome platform for collaboration. It really gives you everything you need, but yet you don't have the adoption and the engagement you're looking for, and you got to have it now, right? You don't have the chance to do a 3-month project to roll out Teams in the best way that you can. So now what, right? And that's where we want to start talking about is, okay, what do you do? Well, first thing, and before I even get into training and training materials, which is what this slide says, let me encourage you to spend a little bit of time. You don't have to spend much, but a little bit of time diagnostically understanding what the problem is. I use the word diagnostic, and that may not be the right word, but why haven't people engaged? Is it because you didn't roll it out to a different group, or is it because they didn't buy in, or is it because they didn't know how to use it? Right?
Right.
Understanding that problem, or those characteristics, will allow you to tailor your approach most effectively and most economically to solving the problem. Now, we start here with training and training materials because we find in our SI work and working with a number of customers that it's with Teams, the hard part's not turning it on and implementing it. Sure, there's security and there's governance, there's things we have to set, but the hard part is getting people comfortable using it, right? So let's talk about how we do that very, very quickly, right? So we're going to pinpoint the enable aspect of our methodology. Again, we're going to pick and choose here a little bit, which goes against all the conventional wisdom of change managers, let me be clear, but we're going to pick and choose the pieces, triage the problem. We do believe for training that there are some awesome video first training approaches that we like to use. What it does is it allows for face-to-face but virtual platforms, and also can be self-paced. So I'm going to walk through Microsoft Learning Pathways, Brainstorm, and Clip Training, and talk about what some of these look like. First of all, Learning Pathways is a relatively new solution that Microsoft is promoting. I mean, it's been out there a while, but they're really focusing on it right now, and really put the focus on in 2019. in a very timely fashion, right? It's a free service if you are a Microsoft licensee to learn how to use their products. And what you can do is there's an enormous amount of content out there, both in Wikipedia / format as well as videos. And you can tailor what's called a pathway, hence the name Learning Pathway, to meet your employees' needs. So it comes back a little bit of understanding what the problem is and what your employees need, but you can tailor content to meet with them where they are, where they can do this on-demand, self-service, either reading an article or watching a short video. There are also third-party partners that we at Perficient work with that are also Microsoft licensed and certified that Microsoft recommends. Brainstorm, Clip Training, there's a number of them out there. Those are two that we like and that we work with that have an awesome array of short video vignettes between 30 seconds and probably 2.5 to 3 minutes is the longest on specific topics related to Microsoft Teams or frankly, any of the Microsoft 365 suite. But what we would do here for Teams is you can customize a playlist for your employees to really focus them, narrow in on the content. What we find is the content, because it's short, is easy to consume because they're small chunks. You can tailor and watch only the ones that are relevant to you, and because they're videos, they're on demand. Now with Brainstorm and Clip Training, these are third-party subscription services, but they're very economical and certainly worth the investment. The other thing we do when it comes to using Teams from a training perspective is simply use Teams. Now, we encourage you to use Teams to learn Teams by getting into it and playing with the tool. It is amazing how much more you can learn by doing than watching. So as great as those videos are, and I'm a proponent of them, sometimes you just got to get in and do. And there's a couple of different factors here that I'd like to highlight. One is, as a team, get in there, play around, see all the different features that are out there. Secondly, if you are in leadership and listening to this call, you have to model this behavior. We talk in change management. One of the key principles is for success is active and visible executive sponsorship. We need executives out there touting a change, whether it's a new technology or process, whatever it is, why it's beneficial to the company, and even personal, why it's important to them. This is the same thing, but on steroids. We need leadership using these tools. So if you're in leadership and you're working with your team and rolling out Teams, you should be using Teams. If someone IMs you, let's say you have Skype as a legacy tool, or maybe you have something else, but you've got Teams available to you. If they send you a message in Skype, for example, you should respond in Teams. Get folks into the tool. They'll see you using it, and you'll also be educating them through the process. And in a second, Ron's going to talk about change champions. Change champions, if we can get them using these tools, again, it will proliferate down into the universe.
That's right, because people do model after leadership, to your point. And so when it comes to your change management network, change champion network, you have to think about it differently. Because as David stated, we really don't have a lot of time. So then you're really taking more of an agile approach, where maybe we're doing 50% acting and 50% listening, and then pivoting to make sure that we are invoking all of the change that we need in order to get the results that we're looking for. So we understand, like, from an organization perspective, you asked all the questions for your change champion network, right? So in order to be effective, how should it be structured? What are a change champion's responsibilities? How do we effectively navigate their time? Because they have day jobs, right? This isn't something that someone just gets paid to do 24/7, I would think. And of course, will champions engage other early adopters, super users, or pilot programs, those kinds of things? Well, pilots are out the window, right? Because now we're all forced into it together. We're all in the yuck together. So that means that our membership has to change in order to reflect that. So now, instead of just going with the designated change champions, the people who like to wear the buttons and the t-shirts and whatnot, and the early adopters and super users and super cool kids, instead, let's flip that on its head. Because now, let's go with those designees and the people we talked about in the first bucket, but let's accelerate it. Now let's get into the point where we can move all the way down that chain of people, not just executives having these particular traits and pushing those down, but going all the way down to your people managers, right? Because odds are people manage between 5 and 10 folks per manager. So set up Microsoft Teams specifically for those folks to talk to their employees. That one helps with communication, especially for crisis times like these. So when you want to push those messages out, often they're coming from your middle management and others anyway. So now you can start reflecting that within teams there. Also having wider swath buckets for people to be able to talk via Yammer and others. And then of course, bring those Yammer conversations into those individual teams via tabs. So whether it's a manager or an org-wide team, share that information by sharing those conversations from your Yammer communities. But within that comes a lot of different pieces, right? If you could go back there, that'd be great.
All right.
So it's not just people managers. You have specific use cases where Teams adoption really helps. So, project management is a huge one, functional teams as well. And of course, service desk folks. When you have all of these people contributing to your community as a change champion, you get a lot more out of it. So then your coverage goes from what your typical one is, 50 to 1, right? Change champions to who they're supporting. If you can get that number down, in some cases all the way down to a 5 to 1 ratio, you're going to be successful. And you're also going to listen more as well. Engagement wise, if you have a wider swath of employees who are involved in a change champion network, that means the work that they have to put in may be lessened. And of course, overall, you can still communicate over the classic channels and collaborate that way. Let's go to the next one and look at some metrics.
Ron, if I can add on this for a second.
Sure.
We use the word change champion. We've used it historically one way in change management. And this is one of the ways I think we're seeing things a little bit differently. Right. In some ways, these might be your early adopters or super users that are out there in the field. We're going to need a lot more of them, and we're going to use them a little differently than we've historically used change champions to be effective. But they're your boots on the ground, your first line of defense. We've always said that around Change Champion Network. But what's different in this case is we're using the tool, and we're all using the tool at the same time. We're not rolling it out. We're all using it. And so having these people on the ground is going to provide the best user experience for your employees. It's going to drive adoption the quickest. It's also going to save your help desk from getting a million calls with how do I use this?
That's right. That's one of the bigger benefits that we don't necessarily talk about all the time. Another piece of this, of course, is that when it comes down to it, a lot of your metrics are going to have to be driven off of user activity. And here's a particular example, right, where consider the art of teamwork to be your training campaign, as it were. And so you want to be able to track a few things. And I realize that there's a lot of other working pieces on the back end for tracking who's attending training and the impacts of that training, but you have to work your way up to something like this where let's concentrate on the far right column first, which is your champions program. You're tracking the number of employees versus, the functional parity that people are encountering. And of course, you're looking down to the effects of active users, chat usage, meeting usage, and calls. So keep in mind that I understand that this looks like just functionality, calling it out. But when we're all forced into a scenario where we all have to use Teams, it's most important that we learn our way around it. And then we can get into the point of customizing Teams, bringing in bots, and satisfying more sophisticated use cases. Right now, we just want to be on a common plane of knowing how to start a meeting, knowing how to record a meeting, and how those things take place, and sharing documents, and just replacing the normal human interactions that you would have during the day. And looking in like the center of that diagram too, you can also see, the effect of the users that you've reached, right? And how your training program is enacting across these different pieces. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, so as we start to drive campaigns to adoption, often the best thing to do is to procure a third-party tool, to be honest with you, because that's going to give you a much deeper level of detail into your adoption and user insights. I've classified each one of these different examples of metrics sources as user activity, adoption, and insights. The reason why is that anyone can go into, with the right privileges, right? Anyone can go into the admin center and look at the number of users, some of the email activity, file activity, and some of those things, but they're pretty basic. And they're also limited as far as their longevity and what they offer you. So if you're looking just to see a couple of very point metrics as far as who's doing what, then you can definitely get some of that. But really, the first thing I would do if I don't have a tool already would be to download the Power BI adoption pack. It takes all of the signals out of your tenant and starts to make sense of it from an adoption perspective. So communication, collaboration, access from anywhere, on and off network, some of those things become way more important and in your face, which really helps. And plus you can build additional Power BI reports out of that. Once you go into the third party side of things, then you can start getting insights and deeper user activity and functions. You can start looking at sentiment scores of some of your messages. You can look at, recent team and channel activity, as well as, if you're using tools like tyGraph and others, they'll give you a measure of active engagement, which really goes into not only are people looking at the messages that people are posting, but are they sharing? Are you getting a lot of replies? And what are some of the top activity people that you're seeing from a reporting perspective, so you can bring them back into your Change Champions network? Because sometimes people just do this out of the box without considering themselves to be champions, and you can help to empower and embolden them to start leading the cause. And we have 3 examples of these. The admin center we've all seen before, so we could probably go to the next one. The adoption pack is really good because it gives you your adoption across all the different workloads. You definitely want to concentrate on Teams specifically, but if you're moving from Teams to Skype or anything else, and maybe you have the luxury of being a little bit more patient with your migration, this is a great tool for looking at your month-over-month activity versus what you would get out of the admin center. And then next comes, this is tyGraph specifically, where you can start looking at your device usage, your working out loud score, right? Like who's really making the most of the platform that's out there? And, where are my users being centered from? What does my team's activity look like? And of course, slicers over, years, months, days, and even department if you have that information loaded into your Active Directory. So then you can really start getting some great insights across your entire tenant.
And Ron, just to pile on this for a second,
Sure.
when I spoke a few minutes ago about running some diagnostics or understanding who is doing what and where your potential gaps are, where you would want the adoption focus, this is exactly the kind of material that provides a ton of value, because now you have a fantastic idea. You can drill down to understand to the individual level, but really the department level, the geography level, the business unit level, the functionality aspects, to understand where you need to focus. And then now I can learn, okay, how do I need to communicate them from a change management perspective? What kind of training can I gear to these people? Because I understand where the challenges are. And this becomes why you have to invest in this. This stuff isn't expensive. It pays for itself 100,000 times over, because now you can be much more economical and efficient in how you go after increasing adoption.
That's right. And it also helps to prove out those best laid plans, right? So once you start planning and then you get into the point of listening, now you can take the feedback that you're getting and map it up to the results that you're getting from a metrics perspective. And that can help you spend the right time with the right activities. So you're not just looking at user feedback as a sounding board, because we always have those vocal minorities and others. You can back that out with the metrics and the user activity versus the maybe very vocal minority user opinion.
And I spoke to the leadership a little bit ago about talking about how to model behavior. If you're not in leadership and you are not authorized to sign the check, right, or to make the call to what you're going to invest in from a training or change management perspective, this gives you the data, this gives you the armament that you need to take that to your leadership. So now I'm speaking to you, manager level, how do you harness this information and then take it above? This gets you a lot of data you need.
That's right. And let's face it, executives love pretty graphs and dashboards and whatnot. Next, let's reconsider how employees access data and applications. There's a lot here, but really, if we look at the left side, we know that when we're forced off site, it shines a light on the accessibility of your applications, right? So you want employees to stay productive, and you want to make sure that time reporting, expenses, employee self-service, and even your service desk and other things do not take a hit just because people are working remotely. And the best way to do that is to start looking at the Microsoft security stack in order to use things like Azure Application Proxy as a start. Because the first thing you'll notice as you move all of your employees off site is that if you require VPN for a lot of your traffic, even going to Office 365 in some cases, believe it or not, when you're in those scenarios, your VPN is going to take a hit. And while it may seem like an easy play to just roll out a backup VPN or a new instance of it, that's not the right move when you could actually be routing traffic outside of your organization to trusted sites, right? Because your Office 365 tenant is already authenticated anyway. There's no reason to bring that traffic through your organization via a hub and spoke model. There's no reason to do that. And if anything, you're doing more damage to your network than good and causing a collapse of your network for other users, which means that all the other pieces start to unravel and fall apart. So keep in mind that VPN related network stress is a thing, and you want to make sure that you're avoiding that, not just by rolling out more VPNs, but making sure that you kind of enable more of a zero trust model and start rolling traffic through the necessary mechanisms, not from a network-based perspective, but authentication and verification first.
Okay, so now you've adopted Teams, you've rolled out Teams. Hopefully many of you done that already. We've talked about how do we drive that adoption, how do we know where the gaps are, how do we ensure we have the data to back us up and support what we need, where we currently are, and what actions we need to take. Now we are working from home. So Monday morning, or last Monday, or the Monday before, right? You've got all the functionality, you've got the adoption, but how are you still successful from home? Because it's a different way of working. I mean, yes, some of us worked remotely before, but we didn't all work remotely. We didn't all work remotely 100%. So some best practices around working with teams and this great software that are really, really important. First of all, as the previous slide said, which I skipped through, is how do you bring your company culture home? First of all, you want to set up your work environment, and it needs to be separate from your home environment. So hopefully you have a place where you can segment off your office. So when you step into the office or you step out of the office, you have done one or the other. It's not your dining room table, your kitchen table, so you don't leave work, because over time that becomes a real drag and a real strain on your ability to focus, and it's extremely fatiguing. I talked to someone yesterday. I saw a post on LinkedIn yesterday by another change management practitioner, and he said, I challenged myself to have 15 minutes of downtime between meetings. So I left my office, which was in his house, and he stepped outside, and he made it 5 minutes and 45 seconds before he went back inside and went back to work. That's not healthy. And he recognized that. But the problem is we've got to maintain those boundaries, because Teams gives us a lot, but sometimes it can give us too much, right?
Right. And there's a mental sanity piece to that too, right? I mean, there's switching costs and a bunch of other things that come to play. And don't get me wrong, it's, I guess, what we call a new normal or whatever. But, we all laughed at that British scientist or whoever who had his kids come in the back of his YouTube call, right? But now that could potentially be any of us.
Absolutely. Secondly, you do want to maintain the old normal at home when you're working from home. So those meetings you always had, have them. The more you can use the video aspect of Teams, assuming you have that turned on, and if you don't, I would encourage you to do so. Use it, right? And it's okay if you're sitting there in a baseball hat because you haven't had your shower because it's 9 a.m. or historically I've had a lot of folks who in an early morning call, didn't want to be on video because they weren't all ready and made up and all that, and I get that. But I'd encourage folks to use Teams because it's Teams in the video aspect because it is much more personable to do that. At the same time, one of the things we miss by being virtual like this are the side conversations, the hallway conversations, the conversations before as we're walking into a meeting or leaving a meeting as we walk out with someone else. We miss those. And so I would strongly encourage people to spend time in one-on-one conversations. And oh, by the way, you can do that using your video capability as well. It goes a long way. And that conversation can and maybe even shouldn't have to be work related, right? It can be, how are you doing? How are you doing amidst this? One of the things we're seeing right now is more empathy than we ever have before. And it's important. We're all in this together, and together we're going to get through it. Showing that empathy goes a long way.
That's
Thirdly,
right. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ron.
No, I was going to say, I mean, the empathy thing is really key. And you just want to make sure that, if you are in a moment where, you're having second thoughts about video and whatnot, don't be afraid to be the leader. And sometimes it comes from the first person turning on video, and everyone else will too. A lot of other people are in that same position of should I, shouldn't I? And often it's just a matter of, hey, turn it on and let's just have a conversation.
Experiment, right?
Yeah.
Let's see what happens. Have fun with it. Many of us have done the virtual happy hours. Probably most of us by this point have done it. And how awesome is that, right? Just to relax and be with people. Teams is rolling out new functionality all the time. The virtual background came out this week, Ron? Was it, or last week?
In the last couple of weeks, depending on your tenant.
Where you now can make a fun background in the back end. We had a good time on a team happy hour the other night because if you look at it in certain ways or you step in the wrong place, you kind of disappear, right? So we had fun, we laughed. And the other thing is, if you experiment and you do something, by the way, I don't think you can break teams, but with anything broader than just teams, and it fails, okay. So we laugh and we learn and we move on, and that's okay. But get out there, see what's out there, and you may find you like it a whole lot. Finally, celebrate. This is a slide. I've repurposed it from an old deck that was part of our normal, hey, how do we do teams adoption, any adoption from change management in a more programmatic method. We're a big believer in celebrating successes. And so part of that is we have gamification techniques, and one of which is awards and fun stuff. This is an example. This is not meant to say that for level 1, you have to have 4 levels, and at level 1, you have to have cookies and sunglasses, and at level 4, you have to give away a surface, right? You don't have to do all of that, but find ways to celebrate. Find ways when who is that first person to turn on their video, or who's the first person to find the new functionality, the new tool, or the background. How do you recognize that team that is doing all of their calls, using the Teams functionality on video, or have totally moved away from whatever legacy platform you're on? Find ways to celebrate, because by the way, we need to celebrate right now more than anything. We're stressed. We've got anxiety. I saw an article that prescription drugs for anxiety have gone up 34% since this thing started. We need to relax. We need to smile. We need to have fun. We need to celebrate. Please make that a part of what you do.
That's right. And of course, this is a series of webinars. So we want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to look back. I know currently we have the Project Cortex one going on this week, but we've also had 2 previous ones for crisis management during April 2nd, had another on April 9th for security for remote work using the Microsoft 365 stack. Today, we're talking about accelerating adoption and change management. And coming up this Monday, we have our virtual team summit. So please sign up for that, because it should be a really great day of Teams education. Now, David, I really wanted to just thank you for coming out today. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure having you along my side as always. I don't know if you wanted to go through a couple questions, but there are a couple in the stack. You want to approach a couple?
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. Hopefully, I'll be able to answer some too, because I know with the change management stuff, you tend to have all that covered. Let's see. So, what do you think is the most undervalued feature in Teams?
Ron, I'll let you take that one.
Sure. So there's a couple that I like. One is that within any conversation, usually, you can format the text with the little A with the brush on it, and that allows you to add titles to a lot of your conversations, which really help in like the posts in your teams and stuff like that. So it helps you to segment out some of that information. And if you're in a one-on-one chat and you can't do that, another thing I would suggest doing is just bolding the first line of the chat with the subject line of whatever you're talking about, or switching topics to.
Very cool.
The other thing is, don't forget to have fun, as David indicated. Use emoticons or emojis as much as possible. Reason why is that whenever you're disconnected from people, that also means that the sarcasm or jokiness or lightheartedness of a message may not come across. So you want to make sure that you just have fun and use as much flair as possible in your messages to communicate your mood, or maybe even lift yourself up at times.
That's a pretty good game to play, actually, Ron. We, in our team happy hour on Tuesday night, we did a change management team happy hour, and we played a game. And the leader of the game gave us a topic, and we had to go find in Teams a GIF that best represented that topic, right? And then we all voted on who had the best one, and we just laughed a ton. It was a ton of fun. Any other questions, Ron?
Right. Definitely. So what do you see as a benefit of Teams versus other point solutions, and how does that change from a change management perspective as far as your approach?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it seems like the word on the street right now is Zoom, right? And as we've moved to virtual platforms for web meetings, and particularly outside of the business environment, right? Zoom is being used a lot with education, or Google's being used a lot for that, as well as with churches and whatnot. There are other great solutions out there, but I would call them point solutions. And so, like what I would say in the Zoom example, I think Zoom is a fantastic web solution. You can have more faces on the screen at one time and more images on the screen. Although I think that's something that Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, that Teams are going to be rolling out soon too, so we can have more than
Right.
4. But the beauty of Teams is it integrates so well with the other applications in the Microsoft suite. So you can do anything out of Teams, whether it's calendaring or IM or your social chat via Yammer, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, all that in one application, which is unique to Teams. The other applications are, to your point solutions, which they may do one thing really well, but they can't do all of them really well. And so when I'm talking change management, and when I'm talking to our customers about why Teams, and when we introduce Teams and roll it out, getting them to see the benefit, and we talked about that case for change, what's in it for me, well, their work just went way down, or their efficiency went way up, said a different way, because they integrate so well, and I'm not duplicating or reinventing the wheel in one platform versus another one because they're not talking to each other. Within Teams, I can do it all seamlessly. And frankly, Ron, we've rolled out Teams within Perficient in the last couple of years, and more globally within the last couple of months. And the reaction I'm hearing from people who are just getting on is, wow, this is really, really cool. I love this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a great place to stop, man. I really appreciate your hard work on this, and you just adding some extra brain power to this conversation today, David. I really appreciate it.
Enjoyed it, Ron. Thank you. And then, as always, you are a national expert in Teams, and so it is a privilege just to share this time with you.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out. I really appreciate it. Angie, I guess I'll throw it back to you.
Yep, thanks so much, Ron, and thank you once again, everyone who joined us for today's webinar. As previously indicated, you will receive a recording of today's presentation along with the slides that Ron and David presented today within the next few business days. So thank you once again for joining, and have a great day.